The waiting room of Meridian Medical Center smelled like money, not the sharp antiseptic bite of a field hospital, not the diesel and copper tang of a forward operating base. This was something else: entirely polished marble floors that reflected the morning light, like still water, original oil paintings hung between patient rooms, a concierge desk where a man in a blazer asked arriving visitors whether they preferred still or sparkling water. Sloan Merritt had seen a lot of hospitals. This was not like any of them. She stood at the entrance to the fourth-floor nursing station at 6:47 in the morning, 3 minutes before her shift was scheduled to begin, and she did what she always did when she entered a new space. She read it: exit points, 2 stairwells, 1 elevator bank, sight lines clear down the main corridor, blind corner near the supply closet at the far end. Personnel one night: nurse finishing, charting, 1 orderly pushing a linen cart, 1 security guard at the elevator whose eyes were on his phone instead of the hallway. She clocked all of it in under 4 seconds. She noted, as she had noted on day 1 and day 2, the man on the second floor with the facility's consultant badge who sat near the stairwell and read the same document every morning. He was not reading it. Nobody read the same document 3 days in a row. She had filed that observation in the same mental drawer where she kept everything that did not yet have a category but would eventually need one. Then she put on her name badge, tucked a pen behind her ear, and went to work. This was her 3rd day at Meridian. Her locker still had the previous nurse's combination written in marker on the inside of the door. Her scrubs were the standard issue teal that all the floor nurses wore, laundered and pressed with a precision that her colleagues had already noticed and said nothing kind about. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, no jewelry, no rings, nothing that could catch on equipment or give someone something to grab. Old habits. She had spent 4 years as an HM2 hospital corpsman, 2nd class, attached to a unit based out of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, 18 miles up the coast from where she now stood. The work she had done there was not the kind that appeared on recruiting brochures. It was the kind that happened in the back of helicopters at 2 in the morning, or in the dirt outside a compound that hadn't appeared on any map she'd been given, or in the silence after a firefight when the shooting stopped and the real work began. She did not talk about that work. When the hiring committee at Meridian had asked about her previous experience, she had said Coronado Medical Clinic. She had smiled the right amount. She had answered their questions with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly how much information was necessary and had given slightly less than that. They had hired her because she had an excellent record and excellent references, and because she seemed, in their words, very calm under pressure. She was. She just hadn't told them why. Deborah Briggs had been the charge nurse on the 4th floor of Meridian Medical Center for 11 years. She was 53 years old, 4 inches taller than Sloan, and possessed of the particular authority that comes not from a title, but from the absolute certainty that she knew more about this floor than anyone else alive. She had trained 37 nurses over the course of her career. She had outlasted 4 hospital administrators and 2 changes in hospital ownership. She had opinions about IV insertion angles that she shared whether or not anyone had asked. She had taken 1 look at Sloan Merritt on day 1 and formed a conclusion that she had not revised since. This girl was a problem. Not because she was incompetent. Briggs had worked with incompetent nurses. She knew how to manage them. This was different. This was the specific, unsettling discomfort of watching someone move through a space with a quiet efficiency that suggested they had learned their skills somewhere that Briggs could not quite identify and was not sure she wanted to. On the morning of day 3, she gathered the nursing staff at shift change and said without preamble, "Coronado Clinic, does anyone know what that is? Because I looked it up and the number goes to an answering service and they won't confirm employment records." The room was quiet. "I'm not saying anything," Briggs said. "I'm just saying, keep an eye on her." 3 of the 6 nurses nodded. 2 looked at their shoes. 1 glanced toward the hallway where Sloan was already moving through her morning patient checks with the unhurried, focused energy of someone who had somewhere important to be and had already figured out the fastest way to get there. Owen Stahl said nothing. He had been the attending on this floor for 7 years, and he had learned over those 7 years that the most interesting information in any room was usually contained in the things people were not saying. He watched Sloan work from the edge of his peripheral vision, and he cataloged what he saw. She moved with economy. Not the efficient economy of good nursing training, though that was present too, but a deeper economy. The movement of someone for whom wasted motion had at some point carried a cost that made them stop wasting it. She positioned herself in rooms the way field physicians did, always with a clear line to the door. She checked expiration dates and dosage labels with a speed that indicated she was running the calculations in parallel, not sequentially. And once walking past the locked medication cabinet with a chart in her hand, her right hand had come up and rested briefly against the cabinet door, in a motion that stopped before it completed the beginning of a reach that had been trained into a context this cabinet did not match. Muscle memory, old muscle memory. The kind you build in conditions more specific than any clinic. He said nothing to Briggs. He kept watching. Frank Dunn had been admitted to Meridian 2 days earlier with what his intake form described as generalized anxiety and cardiac palpitations. He was 58 years old. He had served 2 tours in Iraq with the 82nd Airborne, been medically separated in 2009 after an IED incident that had left him with a partially reconstructed left knee and a hearing loss in his right ear that he had not disclosed on 2 subsequent job applications. He had come to Meridian because his daughter had found him sitting in his truck in the driveway at midnight, staring at the steering wheel, and she had driven him here herself and stood at the admissions desk until someone took him seriously. The attending physician had reviewed his intake, ordered a standard cardiac workup, and prescribed a low-dose anti-anxiety medication. What the attending had not noted, because he had spent 4 minutes in the room and asked the questions from the standard checklist and moved on, was the way Dunn was breathing. Not dramatically wrong. Not the kind of wrong that set off monitors. The kind of wrong that looked to an untrained eye like shallow breathing from anxiety. The kind of wrong that a person learned to recognize by spending time in situations where the difference between that pattern and normal anxiety breathing was the difference between a man being alive in an hour and not being alive in an hour. Sloan walked into Dunn's room at 7:15. She had not been assigned to him. His room was at the far end of the hall from her patient cluster. She had passed his door on her way to the supply room, and she had glanced in through the window, and she had stopped. She pushed the door open and went in. Dunn looked up from the television. "You're not my usual nurse." No, she was looking at his chest, the rise and fall, the slight tension in the left side, the way his left shoulder sat a quarter-inch higher than his right. "How long have you had the tightness?" He blinked. How long?" He was quiet a moment. "Couple days. Figured it was just the other stuff." "Which side?" "Left." "Any tapping, like someone knocking inside your chest?" He stared at her. Yeah, actually, how'd you know that?" She was already at the supply cart. Percussion hammer, stethoscope. She moved with the contained speed of someone running a protocol they had run enough times that the steps had long since stopped requiring thought. She listened. She percussed. She placed 2 fingers precisely along his left chest wall and felt the subtle paradox of a space that should have been giving resistance and wasn't. Tension pneumothorax, left side, early stage progressing. She went to the door. "I need a 14-gauge angiocath and a thoracic kit. Room 408. Now." Patricia was in the hallway. She looked at Sloan, then at the room number. "That patient isn't his diagnosis, is Patricia." Sloan's voice was not loud. It was the specific register of calm that leaves no room for debate. "The kit, please." Patricia got the kit. What happened in the next 4 minutes was by clinical standards routine. Second intercostal space midclavicular line. Needle decompression. The audible release of pressure. The immediate change in Dunn's breathing, deeper, easier, the shoulder dropping back to where it belonged. By the standards of what anyone in that hospital had been expecting from the new nurse on day 3, it was something else entirely. Briggs arrived at the room 40 seconds later, alerted by Patricia's radio call. She stood in the doorway and looked at Dunn, who was breathing like a man who had just remembered that breathing wasn't supposed to hurt. Then she looked at Sloan, who was logging the procedure in the chart with the same focused calm she had brought to everything else. Briggs did not say anything. For 11 years on this floor, she had always had something to say. She turned and walked back to the nursing station. Down the hall at a distance that had looked like coincidence, Owen Stahl had watched everything. He looked at Sloan for a moment. Then he gave a small, single nod, the kind that means "I see you," and returned to his chart. Frank Dunn looked up at Sloan as she finished logging. "What just happened?" "You had a collapsed lung. Partial. It's fixed now." The other doctor said, "They said what the chart looked like. I went by what you looked like." Dunn was quiet. Then, "I was in Iraq twice. We had a medic." He stopped. "You remind me of someone." Sloan capped her pen. "Get some rest, Corporal." She left before he could ask how she knew his rank. Room 412 had been bothering her since 6:48. Not the room specifically, the context around it. The guard stationed outside was not a Meridian security employee. She had checked the badge format on day 1, and the lanyard was wrong, and the badge color was wrong, and the man was standing with his weight distributed the way people stand when they have spent time doing something other than watching a hospital corridor. He had been there 2 days, and the overnight nurses had accepted him the way people accept things presented with enough confidence as simply part of the background. The monitor feed at the nursing station included a secondary readout from all patient rooms. Sloan had been watching the numbers for room 412 since she'd first spotted the pattern. Bradycardia, persistent. Not the kind that triggered automatic alerts, but slow and steady and wrong in a way that someone familiar with a specific kind of poisoning would recognize immediately. She had not said anything. Not yet. She passed the room 3 times during the morning. The third time, doctor. Elaine Marsh was coming out, pulling the door closed with the careful quietness of someone who didn't want anyone to notice. Their eyes met. Marsh said very quietly, "Don't." "Who's the patient?" Is Sloan very firm. "Elaine." Marsh glanced down the hallway in both directions. "The chart is locked at administrator level. I can't pull the full labs. They have a private physician. Dr. Lorne comes in twice a day, reports directly to Caldwell's office. The monitor shows Brady with irregular intervals. That's not cardiac origin." "I know. That's digoxin toxicity pattern, accumulated over several days." Marsh said nothing. "How long has he been in there?" 6 days. Came in through the private entrance on the ground level. Intake done after midnight." She held Sloan's gaze. "People here learn not to ask questions about certain things. I'm telling you the same thing I wish someone had told me 3 months ago when I first noticed something was wrong." She paused. "Don't." She walked away. Sloan stood in the hallway and looked at the room number and thought about the monitor numbers and what a bradycardia pattern looked like when it was digoxin accumulating over 6 days versus when it was organic cardiac degeneration. She thought about the guard who was not a hospital employee. She thought about the man on the second floor who read the same document every morning. She went back to her patients. At 10:41, the numbers in room 412 changed. She heard it before she saw it, not an alarm because the main alert system hadn't triggered, but the secondary readout had shifted into a range that to anyone who hadn't spent years reading those numbers in environments where getting them wrong had permanent consequences looked unremarkable. To Sloan, it looked like a man running out of time. She was already moving before she had decided to move. The guard stepped in front of her with the automatic authority of someone who had done this before. "Floors restricted. That patient's heart rate is in dangerous bradycardia." "Step back, ma'am." She looked at him. He was 6 feet 210 pounds, and he had decided in the first second that she was a small nurse who would do what she was told. "I'm going into that room," she said in the specific flat register she had learned in a completely different context. "You can either let me in, or you can explain to whatever lawyer comes afterward exactly why you blocked clinical access to a patient in distress." 3 seconds. He stepped aside. The room was larger than any other on the floor. Private. One patient in the bed, an old man lying still. His color the particular gray-white that happens when a body is working hard against something it is slowly losing to. His breathing was shallow. His hands resting at his sides were the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime doing hard physical outdoor things, large scarred with a quality of stillness that was different from the stillness of fragility. She went to the monitor first, then his pulse. Then she leaned in close and checked his pupils, pinpoint both, and felt the confirmation settle into her chest like a stone. She was reaching for the call button when the door opened. Victor Caldwell was 58 years old and had never in his life been in a room he did not believe he owned. He was 6 feet 200 pounds, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than Sloan's monthly rent. He walked in with 2 security personnel and stood in the center of the room and looked at her the way a man looks at something that has appeared somewhere it has no business being. "Who authorized you to be in here? This patient needs a digibind infusion and a full tox screen. His digoxin levels are at or near the toxic threshold. His bradycardia pattern suggests 5 to 7 days of accumulation, not acute dosing, which means someone has been, get out. Administering this over time, not treating it. The dosage chart from Dr. Lawrence should be cross-referenced against, I said get out." He moved closer. "You are a floor nurse who has been employed at this hospital for 3 days. You do not diagnose, you do not accuse, and you do not remain in this room for 1 more second." Sloan looked at him directly for the first time. She had been in rooms where the person across from her was significantly more dangerous than a hospital CEO, and she had learned in those rooms to maintain a specific quality of stillness, not submission, not aggression, just the steady, clear-eyed presence of someone who has already calculated the situation and is not afraid of what she found. "Call Dr. Marsh," she said. "Let her examine this patient independently. If I'm wrong, I'm gone. If I'm right..." The blow came without warning. open-handed right side of his palm against the left side of her face, thrown with the full force of a large man who had decided the fastest way to end this conversation was to end it. Her head turned sharply to the right. The sound was flat and dry and loud in the quiet room. The guard at the door had gone still. The second security man behind Caldwell had gone still. Somewhere down the hallway, someone who had been walking past had stopped walking. 4 seconds of absolute silence. Sloan stood exactly where she had been standing. She did not fall. She did not step back. She raised her right hand and pressed her fingers against her cheek, not clutching at pain, but checking the same way she would check a patient's injury, with the same professional calm. Then she turned her head back and looked at Caldwell. The expression on her face was one that very few people had ever seen, and none of them had forgotten. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something quieter and considerably more serious. The expression of someone who has just received information that changes the shape of everything going forward and who is already adjusting accordingly. That, she said, was the biggest mistake of your life. Her voice was low, conversational, completely steady. Caldwell stared at her for 2 seconds with the uncertain expression of a man who expected something different and doesn't know how to recalibrate. Then he nodded to the guard. Remove her. Her badge is revoked. She's done. The women's locker room on the 3rd floor was empty at 10:53. Sloan ran cold water over a paper towel and held it against her cheek, looking at herself in the mirror. The left side of her face was reddening along the cheekbone in the predictable way. She had sustained worse on a Tuesday in a country whose name she could not have mentioned in that building without causing a very different kind of complication. She let out one slow breath. Then she turned off the water, dried her hands, and opened her locker. Past the folded change of clothes and the water bottle was a zippered case roughly the size of a large wallet. She took it out. Inside was a phone, not her personal phone. This one had no branded markings, a matte black case scratched in several places from things she did not intend to think about right now. In the room upstairs, an old man was dying by degrees, one carefully calibrated dose at a time. She had known walking into this building 3 days ago that this was a possibility. She had been briefed on what NCIS suspected and what they needed from someone with access and the right set of skills, someone who could move through the building as a nurse and read what she found without drawing the kind of attention that a federal agent walks in with. What she had not been told, what she had not let herself think about clearly until she saw the halo of gray hair on the pillow and the stillness of those hands and the particular way the light fell across a face she had last seen 18 months ago at a family dinner in Coronado, was that the man in room 412 was Raymond Merritt, her grandfather. Raymond, who had served 31 years in the Navy, who had been in the Gulf in 1991 when the world was a different shape, who had been in Somalia in 1993 in circumstances that had never been formally documented, who had sat across from her at a dinner table and said things she had written down afterward because she didn't want to forget them, who was now lying in an expensive private room being slowly poisoned because he had seen something he wasn't supposed to see and had made the mistake of caring enough to do something about it. She typed with both thumbs, "Grandfather, room 412, active digoxin toxicity, needs immediate escalation. Requesting assets now." She sent it, 12 seconds, then 15. Then the response came in terse shorthand. She recognized from other contexts. Confirmed. Assets en route. ETA 22 minutes. Hold your position. Do not escalate without support. She read it twice. Then she put the phone away and locked the combination. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment longer. 22 minutes. She had held positions in worse conditions for longer. She pulled the paper towel away from her cheek, checked the redness one more time with clinical detachment, and walked back out into the hallway. Outside the window at the end of the corridor, the San Diego sky was the hard, brilliant blue of a clear November morning, and the Pacific was a flat silver line at the edge of the world, and somewhere out over that water 22 minutes away, something was already moving toward them. The hallway was quiet, for now. She heard it before anyone else did. She was standing at the nursing station reviewing a medication chart that she had no professional reason to review, and every personal reason to review, when the sound reached her. Low and rhythmic from the west, from the direction of the water, moving through the glass of the windows and into her chest before it became loud enough for anyone else to register it as anything other than ambient city noise. She knew that sound. She set the chart down. By the time she reached the window at the end of the hall, other people were already looking up. A patient in a room across the courtyard had pressed herself against her window. An orderly had stopped his cart. Patricia was standing in the middle of the hallway with a tray of morning medications, looking uncertain, in the way people look when something is happening outside the parameters of their experience. The helicopter came in from the southwest low and direct the kind of approach that does not ask permission. It was an MH-60S Nighthawk. Sloan recognized the profile before she could make out any detail. The roofline silhouette, the wide chord of the rotor, the way the aircraft moved with a purposeful efficiency distinct from the Medevac helicopters that occasionally use the hospital's rooftop pad. This one was not heading for the roof. It was heading for the parking lot on the north side of the building, a wide flat expanse with 47 vehicles and no designated landing zone. Matte black, no visible registration markings. It came down hard and fast and stopped exactly where it intended to stop. The rotor wash sent a wave of displaced air outward that rocked the nearest cars on their suspensions and scattered a paper cup across 20 feet of asphalt. The sound was enormous. Inside the hospital, the windows vibrated in their frames. Before the skids had fully settled, the port side door was already sliding open. 4 people came out first. Dark gray tactical clothing, low profile, and they moved in a spread formation the moment their boots touched the ground, each taking a position and holding it. The whole pattern established in under 6 seconds with the practiced efficiency of people who do not need to be told what to do because they have done it so many times that the doing is cellular. The 5th person came out last. Tall, broad through the shoulders in the way that takes years of specific work to build and years of specific use to maintain. Dark gray at the temples, clean-shaven. His face had the weathered quality of a man who had spent a significant portion of his life outdoors in conditions that were not recreational. He descended from the helicopter with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who understood that urgency and speed are not the same thing, and he looked at the building entrance once directly, and then he walked toward it. Sloan was already moving. She came down the stairwell rather than the elevator and reached the main lobby at the same moment Brett Harlo pushed through the front doors. They saw each other across 30 feet of marble floor. He stopped. She stopped. He crossed the lobby and came to stand 3 feet from her. He was 47 years old and she had last seen him 16 months ago in a briefing room she was not going to think about right now. His eyes were the same steady, calibrated, missing nothing. He said, "Sit rep." She said, "Single patient room 412, fourth floor. Active digoxin toxicity, 6-day accumulation approaching critical threshold. Private physician named Lauren reporting directly to CEO. CEO is Victor Caldwell, 58, hostile already escalating. Security personnel at patient's door are private contractors, not hospital employees." 2 confirmed. He was already walking toward the elevator as she talked. She walked with him. "You're confirmed on the patient's identity." Confirmed. "When did you know?" She was quiet for 2 seconds. "When I went into the room." He did not press her. He was not that kind of man. He pressed the elevator button and looked at the floor indicator and said without turning around, "Good work, Merritt." She said nothing. The elevator opened. They went up. The guard outside room 412 made one attempt. Harlo produced credentials in a leather wallet he did not open fully and held it at the man's eye level for 1 second. The man read what he needed to read, looked at the 4 people arrayed behind Harlo, and stepped back. The door opened. The room was exactly as she had left it 40 minutes earlier. The same light, the same monitor numbers, the same gray-white stillness of the man in the bed. Except that now she was looking at him without the professional distance she had held in place since the moment she first walked through that door. The face on the pillow was the face she had sat across from at a kitchen table in Coronado 18 months ago. Raymond Merritt was 82 years old. He had been a Navy SEAL for 31 years. He had led teams through the Gulf War and Somalia and through subsequent years in subsequent places that lived in documents with classification levels Sloan did not have access to. He had retired in 2001 and spent the years since at a house in Coronado that he kept very clean and very quiet. He was her grandfather, her father's father, and right now he looked like a man who had been slowly losing a fight he hadn't known he was in. His eyes opened when Harlo came to the bedside. He looked at Harlo the way men look at the people they have been through things, with a look that contains entire histories in a single second. He said one word, "Brett." Harlo pulled a chair to the bedside and sat and put his hand on the old man's forearm and said in a voice stripped of everything except what mattered, "Easy, Chief, we've got you." Raymond's eyes moved to Sloan. She was standing at the foot of the bed. She was very still. He was reading her completely without gap, the way he had always read her, the way that told her he saw not just what she was now, but everything she had been along the way. "Some men look at you. Raymond Merritt looked into you and you felt the difference." She looked back. Neither of them said anything because sometimes the thing that needs to be said has already been said by the fact of being there. Then Dr. Marsh came through the door with a medication kit, and the moment passed and everyone went back to work. Victor Caldwell stood at the window of his sixth-floor office and watched the helicopter in the parking lot with an expression that no one in his professional life had ever seen on his face. He turned and picked up the phone, not the desk phone, the other one prepaid purchased in cash in Phoenix 14 months ago, and replaced every 90 days. It rang twice. The voice that answered was the voice of a man who had not personally been in a difficult situation in a very long time because he was very good at ensuring that difficult situations happened to other people. "I've seen the news," the voice said. "They're in the building. Federal credentials. Four-man team and a commander. They have access to the room." "How did they find him?" "I don't know yet. The nurse." "I don't care about the nurse." A pause. 3 seconds. "Reeves cannot leave that building with anything he can verify. You understand what I'm saying to you?" "I understand." "Then stop telling me about nurses and tell me what you're going to do about it." Caldwell looked out the window. One of the helicopter crew was standing beside the aircraft watching the building entrance. Young, alert, the posture of someone waiting to be useful. He had 2 men in this building who were not hospital employees and were not on any traceable payroll. He had positioned them 6 days ago when Raymond Merritt had been admitted as a contingency he had hoped he would never need. He needed to use them now. He made the call. The first sign that the situation had changed came to Harlo through his earpiece at 11:14. He was in the hallway outside room 412 running through logistics with Fowler, a quiet, efficient former special warfare combatant craft crewman who specialized in medical evacuation coordination. The problem was straightforward and serious. Raymond needed to be moved to Balboa Naval Medical Center 14 miles north where a full toxicology team was standing by. He could not go by ground transport. His cardiac rhythm was too unstable for a 40-minute city drive. He needed to be airlifted. They had an aircraft in the parking lot. The problem was that Marsh had spent the last 6 minutes explaining very precisely that moving Raymond without first stabilizing his digoxin levels carried significant risk of cardiac arrest and stabilization, required a minimum of 30 to 45 minutes of supervised infusion that could not be rushed. 30 to 45 minutes. Then Fowler touched his earpiece. He listened. His expression did not change the way most people's expressions change when they receive bad information. He had spent years receiving it and had learned to process it without broadcasting it. But Sloan, standing 12 feet away, watching the hallway, saw the slight shift in his posture and knew before he spoke that something had moved. Fowler looked at Harlo. "We have a problem." Overwatch caught a reflection. 3rd floor window north building across the lot. 680 meters. Someone set up a position while we were coming in. The angle puts them direct line on room 412. The north building was a 7-story medical office complex attached to Meridian by a covered walkway. It had its own entrance, its own elevator bank, approximately 350 people moving through it on a normal business day, none of whom were aware that someone had set up a sniper position on its 3rd floor in the last 30 minutes. Harlo looked at the closed door of room 412. Behind it, Raymond was connected to a digibind infusion that could not be interrupted. Behind it, the window faced north, which was exactly the direction the problem was coming from. He looked at his team. Fowler, 2 others at the stairwell doors, the 4th man outside covering the vehicle. Nobody with a long-range rifle. This had been a medical extraction. They had not come prepared for a counter-sniper problem because nobody had flagged the possibility that Caldwell would escalate this far this fast. The elevator opened. Frank Dunn rolled out in a wheelchair, pushing himself with the determined effort of a man whose left knee had been reconstructed and who did not allow that fact to stop him. He was in a hospital gown and looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days, which was accurate, but his eyes were clear and his jaw was set with the expression of someone who has made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion. He rolled to Harlo and stopped. "Sir." Harlo looked at him. "I know you don't know me. My name is Frank Dunn, 82nd Airborne, 2 tours Iraq. I'm a patient here." He paused. "This morning your nurse saved my life. She came into my room, not her patient, not her assignment, and she fixed something 2 doctors had missed for 2 days." Another pause. "I don't know what's happening in that room down there, and I'm not asking, but if you need someone to tell you what that woman can do, whatever she says she can do it." He turned the wheelchair around and pushed himself back toward the elevator. Harlo watched him go. Then he looked down the hallway to where Sloan was standing. Briggs was 15 feet further along the corridor, chart in hand, motionless. She had heard every word. Harlo said Merritt. Sloan walked to him. He said it without preamble, without softening the way people speak when time is the most expensive thing in the room. I need a shooter. Right now. She was still for 1 second. I'm a nurse. Sloan. He used her first name. He only used first names in specific circumstances. She knew which circumstances. She looked down at her hands. She had looked at them 1,000 times over 18 years and thought about a specific promise made in a specific place on a specific day. Her hands had not held a rifle in 18 years. They had held IV lines and surgical instruments and compression, bandages, and once in a helicopter. Over a place she could not mention, they had held a man's femoral artery closed for 11 minutes while someone else flew and someone else prayed, and the man in question lived because her hands had not let go. Steady hands. That was what her father had called them, standing in the flat, scrubby yard behind their house in West Texas the first time he put a rifle in her 8-year-old grip, correcting her stance, adjusting her shoulder angle, showing her how to settle the weight. You've got your grandfather's hands, he had said. Steady. Don't fight the rifle. Let it do what it knows how to do, she learned. By the time she was 10, she was hitting targets at distances that made the men at the range go quiet in that specific way that means they don't have a category for what they just watched. By the time her father redeployed for the last time, they had a ritual Saturday mornings. The range 200 rounds between them, the sun coming up over the flat horizon, his voice in her ear talking about wind and elevation and patience. He deployed in March of 2008. He did not come back. She had been at school when the staff car pulled up. She had seen it from a classroom window. The dark sedan, the dress uniforms, the way her teacher had come to get her, with the careful expression that teachers only wear when they already know. She had known too by the time she reached the hallway. She had known from the teacher's hands. Her mother had held her outside the church on the day they buried Dale Merritt, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, and had said the thing that mothers say when they are trying to make a terrible thing finite. She had said it once quietly with her face turned away from the other mourners. Promise me you won't give your life to it. Promise me you won't ever pick up that rifle again. She had been 10 years old. She had promised. 18 years. She looked at Harlo. Where's the Barrett? He walked her to the stairwell door where Fowler was already unzipping a case. The Barrett M82A1 was 30 pounds of precision engineering, 50 caliber bipod mounted a rifle that had no polite social context and was not designed for one. Sloan had fired one 3 times in her life. The first time she was 17 at a range outside San Antonio with a friend of her father's who had not known he was about to be impressed. The second and third times were in contexts she still could not discuss. She picked it up. Her hands knew where to go. Fowler watched her hands settle onto the rifle with the automatic precision of deeply grooved muscle memory, and something in his face shifted the specific expression of a person revising an assessment midstream. They moved to a room 3 doors down from 412 with an oblique angle to the north building. Harlo cleared the room in 12 seconds. Fowler set the bipod on the windowsill while Sloan checked the scope. Night Force ATCR dialed for the distance. 680 meters. Morning air 63 degrees. Wind from the southwest at approximately 8 knots, consistent with the flags on a building 2 blocks north. She lay behind the rifle. The world went quiet. This is the thing that people who have not done it do not understand about long-range marksmanship. It is not about aggression. It is not about force. It is about the absolute suspension of everything that makes you human for a specific number of seconds. The heartbeat, the breath, the involuntary movement of the body's machinery, and the replacement of all of that with a single focused stillness that is closer to a medical procedure than anything else. Her father had called it the quiet place. Not silence, not calm, a specific quality of interior stillness that has to be practiced and cannot be faked and takes years to build correctly. She found it in 4 seconds. It had not gone anywhere. She scoped the window in the north building, 3rd floor, second from the left. The position was good. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing. A slight glare from the partially removed glass, a bipod shadow visible in the lower quadrant, and the barrel of a rifle aimed at a room 30 feet from where Raymond Merritt was receiving a digibind infusion. She measured the wind against the flags, calculated bullet drop at 680 meters for a .50 mg round, adjusted for the oblique angle. Wind, she said, Harlo, 8 knots, southwest, steady. Confirmed target, Fowler binoculars. Confirmed, rifle in position, operator visible. She exhaled, slow and complete. Let it go to the natural pause where the body is briefly still. She squeezed. The shot went left by 6 inches. She did not react. She cycled the bolt in the same motion she had used 10,000 times and made one adjustment: scope left turret, 2 clicks, and found the place where her father's voice was still clear. Steady hands. Let it do what it knows how to do, she squeezed. The second shot was clean. The rifle in the north building window dropped out of sight. She remained behind the Barrett for 3 more seconds, scanning, then came off in the controlled, methodical way her father had taught her. Checked the scope, clear the position, and she was standing upright and the room was completely silent. Harlo and Fowler were both looking at her. She set the rifle down carefully. Secure the north building, there may be a secondary. Fowler was already on the radio. Harlo said quietly, "Who taught you, my father?" He was quiet a moment. "Dale Merritt was the best rifle instructor I ever worked alongside. He told me once he had trained someone better than himself." He paused. "I told him that was the kind of thing fathers say." She said nothing. "He was right," Harlo said. She looked at the window, the parking lot, the helicopter still exactly where it had landed. She had just broken a promise she had kept for 18 years. She stood with that, the weight of it, the shape of it, the particular texture of a decision that cannot be unmade. She had promised her mother. She had meant the promise. She had carried it through 4 years of Navy service, working alongside people who used rifles for a living and had never once picked one up. She turned the thought over once. Then she set it aside in the deliberate way she set aside everything that could not be useful in the present moment. "We need to get back to the room," she said. "If there's a secondary positioned, they may have an internal contact coordinating." Harlo's earpiece crackled. He listened. 1 second. 2. The microscopic tightening in his face that was his version of alarm. "Raymond's gone into arrhythmia. Marsh needs you in the room." She was already moving. Harlo caught her arm lightly just long enough. "There's a second shooter." Fowler located him. "Different building. 1,100 meters west position. Still active." He held her eyes. "And there's a second contractor in the building. Ground level. Moving toward the stairs." She processed all of it. Raymond in arrhythmia. Digibind infusion at critical point. Second shooter at 1,100 meters. Contractor on foot moving floor by floor toward the fourth. Everything at once. She looked at Harlo. He looked back. Neither of them said what they were both thinking because they did not need to. "Room first," she said, "then the rest." She went. She came through the door of room 412 at a controlled run. Marsh was at the bedside, both hands working, her voice low and focused as she called out numbers to the nurse who had come up from the 3rd floor to assist. The monitor above Raymond's bed was showing what Sloan had feared: the jagged, irregular pattern of ventricular arrhythmia. The heart doing things it was not designed to do. The accumulated digoxin pressing against the boundaries of what the digibind could neutralize in real time. She was at the IV line in 3 seconds. Marsh looked up. Something in her expression changed when she saw Sloan's face. Not relief exactly, but the adjustment of a person who has been carrying a weight alone and has just been joined by someone capable of sharing it. "Digibind's second dose is running. Rate is correct, but he went into V-fib 30 seconds ago. Cardioverted once back in sinus, but unstable. We're borderline on the magnesium." Sloan read the monitor, read the IV line, read Raymond's color, his breathing, the movement of his chest. "Push the magnesium now. Full 2 grams over 4 minutes, not 10. We don't have 10. Standard protocol is Elaine." Quiet. "Full 2 grams, 4 minutes." Marsh pushed the magnesium. Sloan checked the digibind infusion rate, recalculated based on Raymond's weight and the 6-day accumulation window, made one adjustment to the drip with the calm precision of someone running arithmetic that does not care about being watched. She moved to his left side, checked his radial pulse manually. The monitor told part of the story. The pulse told the rest, the texture of it, the quality, the things that machines measure in numbers, inexperienced hands measure in something that does not have a name. The pulse was weak, but it was there, and it was fractionally more regular than 30 seconds ago. Raymond's eyes were open. He was watching her. He did not speak. He understood what she was doing, and he trusted her to do it, and he stayed still and let her work, which was the most useful thing he could do, and which required a particular kind of discipline that most people in his condition could not manage. She worked. The door opened. She heard it before she turned, heard it, and distinguished it from the hallway sounds she had been tracking with one part of her attention, because these footsteps were wrong. Not soft rubber soles, not tactical quiet. The footsteps of someone moving with the specific combination of speed and suppression that means they are trying to be quiet and are not quite good enough. The contractor came through the door fast, large, 6 feet, 220 pounds. Suppressed sidearm raised in the practice motion of someone who had done this before. His eyes went to the bed first. To Raymond. The target was the priority. He had 1 second where his attention was on the bed. Sloan was already moving. She crossed the 7 feet between them, not running but driving weight low, the way she had been taught in a context that had nothing to do with nursing. Her right hand went to the weapon-first wrist control barrel, directed away from the room, and her left elbow came up in the short, economical arc of a strike designed not for force, but for disruption, for the specific neurological interruption that buys the half-second you need to finish the sequence. The gun hit the floor. She did not give him time to recover. 2 more movements, wrist lock, hip throw, and he went down hard against the tile with the impact of someone who outweighed her by 100 pounds, but had been redirected by someone who understood leverage better than he understood size. He did not get up. She stepped back. Her left forearm had caught the doorframe on the way in, deep abrasion, not a fracture manageable. She stood over him for 2 seconds in the silence that follows. Sudden violence, her breathing elevated, but controlled her hands already returning to neutral. Both hands. She looked at Marsh. Marsh was pressed against the wall beside the IV stand, one hand braced on the pole, but her other hand had not let go of the magnesium push. She had kept the push going through all of it, standing there with one hand on the medication line while a man was being put on the floor of the room. She was a doctor who had spent 30 years doing hard work, and she had not let go. Sloan looked at the IV line. The rate was correct. The push was on time. She went back to the bedside. She heard voices in the hallway. Truck Fowler and one of the other team members responding to the noise, heard the contractor being secured and removed, and registered none of it in a way that required her conscious attention, because her conscious attention was entirely on the monitor and the numbers that were slowly, with the grudging resistance of a system pushed very far in a bad direction, beginning to stabilize. She became aware at the edge of her peripheral vision that someone was standing in the doorway. Not one of Harlo's team. This person was standing still. Deborah Briggs, standing in the open doorway with her chart held in both hands against her chest. Her face had the expression of someone who has just watched something that requires them to fundamentally reorganize information they believe was settled. She had been in this hallway for the last 3 minutes. She had seen the contractor go in. She had seen Sloan go in after him. She had looked through the small window in the door and seen what she had seen, and she was standing there now because she did not know where else to stand. Sloan held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then she turned back to the monitor. The monitor showed a sinus rhythm, irregular still, fragile, but sinus. She let out one slow breath through her nose and did not allow herself to feel anything about it yet, because they were not done. Harlo was waiting for her in the hallway. His face told her before he spoke. "Secondary shooter is still active," he said. "West position. Fowler confirmed 40 seconds ago. 1,140 meters. Different building, different angle. He repositioned while we were handling the north building." He paused. "The window in 412 faces west." She understood immediately. The first shooter had been a primary with a backup they hadn't anticipated. The second had used the time they spent neutralizing the first position to get settled. 140 meters west-facing, direct line to a window where Raymond lay in a bed that could not be moved. Her left forearm was bleeding through her scrub sleeve, slow seep along the inner radius where the doorframe had caught her. She pressed the sleeve against it, without looking, the way you acknowledge a problem that is real, but not currently the most important problem. 1,140 meters. The first shot at 680 had not been clean on the trigger. 18 years. The muscle memory was there, but it had rust on it, the way a door unused for a long time will move on its hinges, but not smoothly. She had corrected quickly, and the second shot had been right, but she was telling herself a clean story about it, and the honest version was that she had needed 2 rounds to settle the rust out. 140 meters was not 680. She checked the flags through the nearest window on a building almost due west, relevant because the west building was almost directly west, moving faster than before, closer to 12 knots. The flags were moving in the irregular pattern that means the wind is not one thing but several things happening in the same general direction at slightly different times, which is the kind of wind that turns a manageable long-range shot into a problem. She went to the room. The Barrett was where she had left it, bipod set, bolt cycled. She looked through the scope and found the west building, 12 stories roofline, clear against the late morning sky. She swept methodically left to right and found him in the northeast corner of the roofline, 200 feet above street level, prone, settled behind a rifle with a profile consistent with something in the .308 to .338 range. 1,140 meters, adjusting for angular difference. Wind 12 knots shifting. The flags moving in the irregular pattern. She needed to time the shot to the lull, the brief, flat moment between gusts when the flags drooped and the air was briefly honest. She settled behind the Barrett. Her left arm was bleeding. She could feel it. The forearm resting on the bipod was putting pressure on the abrasion, and the abrasion was registering its objection in a clear, insistent way that she was aware of and was not listening to. She watched the flags. Steady hands. Don't fight the rifle. She watched the flags. There. A lull. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The flags at the far building hung almost straight, a brief pause in the coastal push, and she found the stillness inside herself. That place where her father's voice was still clear, and the body stops arguing with the mind, and both of them become a single focused thing, and she exhaled to the bottom of the breath where the body is briefly still the heart between beats, the lungs between cycles. She squeezed. 1 round. Through the scope, the shooter on the rooftop went still, in the absolute way that is different from all other kinds of stillness. She held the position for 5 seconds, scanning the roofline perimeter for additional contacts. None. Then she came off the rifle. Her arm was trembling slightly, not from fear from the abrasion and from the sustained tension of the past 30 minutes and from the accumulated weight of a morning that had started with a medication chart and ended here. The tremor was fine and controlled the small physical vibration of a system that has been used hard and is acknowledging it, and it stopped when she straightened and pressed the sleeve against the forearm again. Harlo was 2 feet behind her left shoulder. He had moved the way he always moved in enclosed spaces, the automatic silence of long practice. He was looking at the west roofline. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 1,140 meters, 12-knot wind shift, left arm. He said it as notation, the way you record a fact that deserves to be recorded accurately. Not praise. Something more than praise. She set the Barrett down on the window ledge with the methodical care her father had taught her. Check the scope, clear the position, note the conditions. We need to get back to my grandfather, she said. Grant Holloway stepped out of the stairwell onto the 4th floor at 1211. He was 51 years old, gray at the temples, built like a former collegiate wrestler who had kept the useful parts and discarded the rest. His face was the kind of face that people consistently forgot within minutes of meeting him, which was the most professionally useful physical characteristic a person in his line of work could possess. He had been in this building for 6 months under the title of Facilities Safety Consultant, occupying a 2nd-floor office near the stairwell, where he had read the same document every morning and watched everyone who passed and compiled over those 6 months a very complete picture of everything that was wrong in this building. He had noticed on day 1 of her tenure that the new 4th-floor nurse read exit points when she entered spaces and kept her back to walls. He had noted it. He had not been surprised when 3 days later, everything moved. He walked to Harlo and produced his credentials and said without preamble, "We're ready to move." Harlo looked at him. 6 months. We needed the Pharmatech records and the Gould connection both. The Pharmatech records were confirmed 4 months ago. The Gould connection took until 8 weeks ago to establish cleanly enough for a federal judge. He paused. We needed someone inside who could keep the patient alive long enough to be a usable witness. Raymond Merritt is the only person who can confirm the verbal instructions given to Lorne, who is currently in federal custody 2 miles from here and is cooperating with everything except the part that connects directly to Gould. Harlo said he'll have that too. He will now. Holloway looked down the hallway toward room 412. How is he stabilizing? Good. Caldwell is still on 6. He hasn't tried to leave the building. We go now. They went. Caldwell was standing at his window when they came through the door. He turned, and for the 3 seconds before his face resolved into the controlled blankness of a man deciding how to proceed, Sloan saw what was underneath it. The specific expression of someone who has just realized that the distance between where they are and where they thought they were is much larger than they believed, and that no calculation available to them closes it. He had been good at making problems disappear. He had the intelligence and the money and the relationship with a man who had the specific kind of political power that makes things go away at the level where things either go away permanently or they do not go away at all. He had not been good enough. Holloway laid it out on the desk. Not the full picture that would come later in rooms with federal prosecutors and the very long machinery of federal accountability. He laid out enough. Patient records, the originals, the ones from before Dr. Lorne arrived, and the process of revision began recovered from a secondary backup server that the hospital's IT department had forgotten to close when they migrated systems 14 months ago. Email threads, 643 of them, extracted over 11 sessions, none of which had triggered the monitoring system. Audio 47 recordings from a device placed in Caldwell's office on Holloway's third day during a routine safety walkthrough that Caldwell had authorized and attended and paid no particular attention to. And the phone records, not the desk phone, the burner, the one purchased in Phoenix that Caldwell believed was untraceable, the one that connected through 2 relay services and a routed server in Delaware to a trust account in the Cayman Islands. Holloway placed each item on the desk with the methodical precision of a man who has been waiting a very long time to do exactly this. Caldwell looked at them. He looked for a long time. Then he looked at Sloan, who was standing near the door. He looked at her for 3 seconds with the expression of a man trying to reconstruct where the error occurred, working backward through the events to identify the specific point where the calculation went wrong. She could see him arrive at the answer. 3 days ago, a small woman in teal scrubs standing at the nursing station. She had smiled the right amount. She was the error. She watched him understand that. She felt no satisfaction. She felt the quiet, flat completion of a task done correctly, the absence of catastrophe, which is its own kind of success. The security team took Caldwell out through the service corridor on the south side, not through the lobby. He had walked through that lobby every morning for 9 years with the unthinking authority of a man who owned the space, and he did not walk through it today. As he passed Sloan in the doorway, he did not look at her. She did not watch him go. She was already thinking about what came next. The photograph of Warren Gould went up on Harlo's laptop screen in the second-floor conference room that Holloway had swept for listening devices the previous month as a matter of routine. 66 years old. Official Senate portrait, blue suit, American flag pin, the direct and serious gaze of a man who wants to be understood as someone who can be trusted with difficult things. Harlo laid out the connection. Payments from Pharmatech through PAC structure to Gould's campaign. 12 months of documented routing. $1.2 million distributed across 7 entities, none naming Pharmatech directly. The kind of structure requiring a forensic accountant and 6 months of patient work to establish. 4 votes in 3 years to reduce funding for independent a clinical research. Not because the funding was wasteful, but because reducing it pushed veterans' health research toward private sector partnerships, which created the specific conditions under which Meridian's contract with Pharmatech had become possible, which created the conditions under which 3 men were dead. A letter from Gould's office to the FDA commissioner supporting fast-track review of Cardivex. Framed in the language of innovation and patient access in American medical competitiveness. Drafted according to a document Holloway had obtained at the request of a Pharmatech lobbyist, communicated through Gould's chief of staff 9 months ago. 3 veterans dead in this building. Men who had served in the specific personal physical way that is different from all other ways of serving. Men who had done things in hard places and come back and grown old, and trusted in the way that people trust things they have been given reason to trust, that the institutions they had served would not turn against them in the end. They had been wrong about that. Sloan looked at the photograph. She thought about Frank Dunn in his wheelchair pushing himself down a hallway on a reconstructed knee to speak for her when she could not speak for herself. She thought about what it took to be that kind of man, to be that hurt that early in the morning, and still move towards something instead of away from it. She thought about 3 names she did not know yet, 3 men who had come into this building and not come out. She thought about Warren Gould's campaign advertisement, the warm voice, the direct gaze. "I stand with those who served," she said. "What happens to him?" Holloway said, "Department of Justice takes it from here. The case is built. The connection is documented. Grand jury indictment proceedings, that's not our work. It'll take time. These things take time. But it's real." She nodded. She looked at the photograph for 1 more second. Then she looked away because she had other things to do. Raymond was sitting up. Not fully, the head of the bed was elevated about 30 degrees, enough to change the geometry of the room, enough to make him look less like a patient and more like himself. His color was returning slowly, the way color returns when a body has been given back something it was running out of. The monitor showed a sinus rhythm. Steady, still fragile, but steady. Marsh was reviewing labs at the small desk in the corner. She looked up when Sloan came in and gave a single nod that contained a considerable amount of information about the last 2 hours and about what she thought of the person who had just come through the door. Sloan went to the bedside and sat in the chair. Raymond looked at her. He reached out and put his hand over hers. It was the hand of a man who had spent 31 years doing things that do not appear in official records. And it was warm, and it was steady, and it covered hers completely, the way it had when she was small, and the world was a simpler shape. He said, with the economy of a man who has spent a lifetime saying only what needed to be said, You broke your promise. Yes. To your mother. Yes. He was quiet a moment. She'll understand. I know. Your father trained the hands, he said. The rest was always yours. She turned her hand over under his and held it briefly, and then she was a nurse again, checking his pulse at the wrist, reading the rhythm with her fingertips, doing the work she had come here to do. Harlo spoke from the window, his voice even and quiet. Dale Merritt told me once when we were in a place I won't name that he had trained someone who was going to be better than him. I told him that was the kind of thing fathers say. He paused. I was wrong. I want to say that to both of you. Raymond said without looking at him, yes, you were. Something moved briefly in Harlo's eyes and then it was gone and the room was quiet. The helicopter lifted at 12:47. The rotor wash came again, the big displaced air of the Nighthawk climbing out of the parking lot, and Sloan stood where she had stood 90 minutes earlier and watched it go. The crew had loaded Raymond with care, Marsh supervising every transfer IV, lines checked and rechecked, the portable monitor synced to the Balboa medical team, waiting 14 miles north with the full toxicology protocol ready to run. He had looked at her through the window before the door slid closed. She had put her hand flat against the glass for 1 second. He had nodded. The helicopter went west first, banking over the parking lot, then turned north over the city, and she watched it until the sound became something felt more than heard, and then until it was a shape against the sky, and then until it was gone. Her forearm was properly bandaged. Now Marsh had done it before she left, efficient and wordless. The abrasion would heal in 10 days. Frank Dunn was behind her at a respectful distance in the wheelchair, watching the sky where the helicopter had been. When she turned, he was already looking at her, and he said simply, "Is he going to be all right?" "Yes, he's going to be all right." Dunn nodded slowly. "Good." The simple finality of a man for whom good news is still good news, regardless of the complications surrounding it. "That's good." She looked at him for a moment. "How's the breathing?" He took a deliberate breath in and out, testing it. "Better than it's been in 2 years. You should sleep." "Probably today." He looked at the sky one more time. "Whatever that was today, your people, whoever they are, you did right." He paused. "I want you to know that." She thought about what to say and decided nothing covered it adequately. "Get some rest, Corporal," she said. She went back inside. 6 months later, the room smelled like chalk dust and cold coffee. It was a training room in a building at Balboa Naval Medical Center, the kind of room that has been used for so many different purposes over so many years that it has stopped belonging to any of them. There were 16 chairs arranged in a semicircle, most of them occupied, and a whiteboard at the front of the room with writing that had been there since 7:45 that morning. Integrated combat medicine, both hands. Sloan stood at the front of the room, civilian clothes, dark pants, plain shirt, hair pulled back. She had a marker in her right hand, and she had been talking for 40 minutes about a clinical decision-making framework that did not appear in any standard nursing textbook because it had been developed in conditions that standard nursing textbooks do not address. The 16 people in the chairs were Navy corpsmen, most of them young. Several had recently rotated back from deployments. 2 were women. One had a left hand that didn't fully close, a souvenir from a helicopter incident he had mentioned once and not elaborated on, and he was one of the most attentive people in the room. Near the back in an aisle chair, Deborah Briggs sat with a notepad on her knee. She had contacted Sloan 2 months after the events at Meridian, 2 weeks after she had resigned from her position there, 3 days after she had called, and said without preamble, with the directness of a woman who had spent 11 years being in charge of things, that she had been wrong, and she was saying so, and she wanted to know if there was somewhere she could be useful. There was. She had driven down from Oceanside every Tuesday and Thursday for 8 weeks. She sat in the back and took notes, and occasionally when Sloan asked for clinical input from someone with acute care experience, she spoke with the precise authority of 32 years of practice, and the young corpsmen listened to her the way they listened to everyone in that room who had done the things they were being trained to do. On the 3rd week, Owen Stahl had come in on a Tuesday. He was not a corpsman and had no professional reason to be there. He sat in the back row with the particular stillness of a man who has been watching something for a longer time and has finally arrived at the place where he can watch it properly. He stayed for the full 3 hours and left without saying anything, which was Sloan had come to understand exactly how Owen Stahl communicated the things that mattered most. He had been back every Tuesday since. Sloan looked at her students. She was not a natural speaker. She had never wanted to be. But she had found over these months that the people in these chairs did not need performance. They needed the specific authority of someone who had been in the room she had been in and was telling them the truth about what those rooms were like and what they required. What she was trying to give them was not technique. Technique was in the textbooks and the hours of practice that would happen after this room. What she was trying to give them was the understanding that the two things, the healing and the fighting, the needle and the rifle, the hands that close a wound and the hands that prevent the next one, were not opposites. They were not even separate. They were two expressions of the same fundamental commitment to the person in front of you and the people around them. Heal when you can, she said. Fight when you must. Know which one the moment requires. And understand that the same hands do both. She wrote it on the board. The VA had requested that she develop the curriculum for a pilot program in 4 states. A phrase had begun to spread through corpsman training cohorts up and down the coast. She had not originated it as a slogan, had said it plainly as a fact, and it had traveled the way true things travel when the people who need them finally hear them. Heal when you can. Fight when you must. Raymond was at Balboa II on the same campus 3 buildings north. He had been released from inpatient care 11 weeks ago and was completing outpatient monitoring, which he approached with the disciplined compliance of someone who understood that the body has requirements that are not negotiable and that the wisest response to those requirements is not resistance, but management. He came to watch her teach on the first Tuesday of every month and sat in the back and said nothing and left when the session ended. Once passing him in the corridor outside the training room, she had asked what he thought. He had said, "Your father would recognize what you're doing." That was all he said. It was enough. The call to West Texas came at 9:17 on a Tuesday evening. She was in her apartment, a 2-bedroom place in the neighborhood east of Balboa that she had rented 6 months ago and slowly made livable. Books on the shelf, a coffee maker on the counter. On the wall, a photograph of her father in uniform, taken before his last deployment, his face clear and direct in the early morning light of a Texas backyard, the flat horizon behind him, everything ahead of him still possible. The phone rang twice. Her mother said, "How are you?" "I'm good, Mom. You sound tired." "I've been teaching." A pause. Teaching. At Balboa, medical training for corpsmen. Her mother was quiet and Sloan could hear the house around her, the quality of silence in a Texas home in the evening, the refrigerator hum, the faint sound of the television from another room. The house she had grown up in. The house with the flat, scrubby yard where she had first learned the weight of a rifle in her hands and the sound of her father's voice telling her how to be still. "That sounds like good work," her mother said. "It is." "I heard some things," her mother said, "from a woman at the VA auxiliary. She said something about San Diego, about a hospital." She paused again. "She said something about a helicopter." Sloan looked at the photograph on the wall, her father's face clear and direct. "Mom," she said, "I want to tell you about something that happened." She had not said those words before, not to anyone outside the specific circles of people who already knew. She had kept it in the professional container where it belonged, the same way she kept everything orderly and managed and accessible only to those with a reason to access it. Her mother said, "All right," so she told her. Not all of it. Not the technical parts, not the names, not the details that would require a security clearance to discuss properly. She told her the shape of it, what she had found and what she had done about it, and why. She told her about Raymond, what had been happening to him, and about the morning she had walked back into a building on day 3 and understood what was actually at stake. She told her about the Barrett and about the promise and about breaking it. She did not frame it as an apology. It was not an apology. Apology. She framed it as the truth because her mother had always been able to handle the truth and had been given less of it than she deserved. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said in a voice that had something in it that Sloan would think about for a long time afterward, "Your father carried his grandfather's hands. You carry your father's. That's not a violation of a promise, baby. That's a line." She stopped. "He would know you did right. I know you did right." Sloan looked at the photograph. She said, "I know." They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes and talked about other things, the town, the weather, the neighbor's dog, the ordinary, persistent texture of a life being lived. When she hung up, she sat in the quiet of the apartment and let herself feel the specific relief of being known by someone who knew you before you were anything in particular. Who knew the 8-year-old in the West Texas yard and the 10-year-old at the funeral and all the versions between then and now? She was all right. She had not been certain before that call that she was all right. Now she was. She looked at the photograph one more time. Her father in the morning light, the horizon behind him, everything ahead of him. She had spent a long time looking at that photograph as evidence of what had been lost. She looked at it now and saw something else, not lost, but transmission. The thing he had given her that had not gone anywhere when he did. The hands, the stillness, the quiet place, the knowledge of which moment required what. It was still here. It was all still here. The phone on the nightstand lit up in the dark room. She reached for it. Harlo. 2 lines. Briefing 0800 tomorrow. New operation. Need your both hands. She read it twice. She looked at the ceiling of the room she had slowly made livable in a city she had decided somewhere in the past 6 months that she was staying in. The city was quiet. The campus was quiet. 3 buildings north, an 82-year-old man who had spent 31 years doing things that do not appear in official records was sleeping soundly for the first time in longer than either of them would count. She picked the phone back up. She held it for a moment. Then she typed 0800, both hands. Ready. She set the phone on the nightstand. She lay back and looked at the ceiling, and in the quiet of the room she heard very clearly, in the way that things are heard that are not sound, her father's voice from a West Texas morning, 20 years gone low and close beside her ear, her small hands learning for the first time the weight of something she would carry her entire life. Steady hands. She closed her eyes. She carried them still.